day so that we could discuss the quote unquote black pulpit. And, I I have been working very hard to not colorize the Church of the Living God. However, when I have to refer to the ethnic expression of the black church, I know that my audience knows that I know that there is no such thing as a black church or a white church. However,
Absolutely.
right now, the ethnic expression of the black church, I am gravely concerned, and I want to talk about it. And so what I want to know is, in your opinion, based on what we just talked about in terms of these seminaries and how they're churning out little melanated atheists and this colored communism, I'm curious to know, how would you answer that question?
I would have to say most definitely. I and even just going back to your vernacular is the black pulpit compromise. I'm one of those persons that I understand that there is no such thing as the black church. So yes, you're right. But for our frame of reference and our frame of context, I just use it as a description because I mean I could talk about the church, but I mean I've been black all my life and I've been
That's
around
all we
black
know.
people. Yeah, that's all. Like I can't, I can't associate with anything else. I can't, Uh, I've spent time in other I've spent time in white churches, and I still maintain that there's a huge difference between what we consider, I guess you could say, white churches and black churches. There still exists a difference between the two. Now we can fellowship and congregate together, but just for description, I do use that phrase, the black church, in regards to the black pulpit. I like that phrase, the black pulpit, because a lot of times I used to say stuff, well, the black church, the black church, the black church. But as I started kind of being more precise, and what I'm trying to get at is really more so at the black pulpit because I believe that a lot of the compromises come from the black pulpit that's not so much so in the congregation. Like if you would really survey our us as a people, as black people, and this is let's take a liberal for example, someone like Michael Eric Dyson. He's even admitted to this from Michael Eric Dyson and even Dr. Umar. They even attest to this. I mean, I knew it was true that black people are primarily conservative in their morals and have primarily been conservative for a long time. So when you start looking at, well, what's happening amongst our people, you see it more so in our leadership. Our leadership are the ones in the pulpit. It is more so pushing this new age of kind of convert the congregation toward these new ideas. So I do believe that it's very much so compromised, and I don't think we could fully address the black church, black pulpit being compromised without singling out strictly to the pulpit, but also looking at where a lot of these pastors, I mean, prior to my generation, pastors did not really have to be seminary trained. I mean,
Right.
you could be a pastor with just a
A pork
tune
chop
and
and a Bible.
yeah, yeah, you can get up there and half read and and can yank that thing. You can preach and lead. So so guys were preaching with just a high school education and sometimes less than that.
Right.
We want to know where you called and can you share your testimony and can you like wow that crowd and lift the offering. So but but
Yeah.
nowadays it's more so established that the person in the pulpit needs to be educated. It needs to be seminary trained. So look at majority of the seminaries in these institutions that people are churning out. People are going to these predominantly, I guess you could say, liberal, if you want to call it that, or just very, very low, low view of scripture institutions. And they are turning out these pastors with this low view, and they're coming to the congregation with this superior ideas that they want to thrust upon the congregation, and that's where you start to see like there's a real, I guess you say, imbalance.
Right.
So
So, compromise, when we talk about compromise, for me a few things come to mind. So obviously compromise in doctrine. Compromise, like you said, in their view of the scripture, just this very low view of scripture. And that doesn't mean they're not using scripture. So let me define what I'm saying. When I say, and I feel comfortable speaking on your behalf, when we say this low view of scripture, it's not that, a lot of these black pulpits, the pastors in them are not opening up a Bible. right? Like Keon Henderson opens up a Bible, right? But he has a very low view of scripture in that one, he doesn't handle the scriptures with care, any sort of integrity. He's not interested in being contextually precise and just echoing the authorial intent. They are literally using the scriptures, what I say, like using it as an accessory, where it's not the
Absolutely.
main event. It is not their rule for faith and practice. And so I would also say they're compromised in what they believe the mission of the church is. That's why you see so much of the pulpit talking about a lot of the things that you mentioned. What do you believe are some of the biggest threats to the ethnic expression of the Black church, or should we just say the biggest threats to the Black pulpit?
Uh, I would say these agendas. That would
Okay.
be the biggest threat. Uh, these agendas are really spreading on a mass wide scale, and I can't help but say it is compromised. I mean, one of the first videos that I put out was right after I attended this conference, and that's the one. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be my first one, but it ended up being my first one because immediately after I left the conference. Now, this is the conference I live in Houston, Texas. This is a conference that took place in Houston, Texas, and these are people who you would not consider, liberal or any of that stuff. And so I'm leaving the conference and I'm hearing all this crazy stuff, and I'm like, man, these Negroes have lost their mind. Like what? And these are preachers who I've looked up to, and I've attended the conference, probably for the past 6 years. But each more and more, the ideas get more radical, and it seems like people are moving further and further away from the biblical strongholds that we've always treasured, and even that biblical foundation. And proud and pastors are the ones that's doing it, that are leading the charge. And I'm just like, nah. Yeah, so yeah,
When you
yeah.
say
I think that's the
agendas,
biggest threat.
what are these agendas? Can you be a little bit more specific?
Absolutely. The black community itself is a unique one. Like we're probably the only community, like people talk, we are predominantly matriarchal. And this is not me. This is even when I was researching for my chapter 2. The black community is probably the only matriarchal community in America. Every other community, the men kind of have the authority, and kind of even are the main governors of their family and their society, and they kind of lead and take the charge. In the black community, it's reversed.
Right.
We are the only ones where the women are looked at as, the rock, the authority, the person who has the most say so. So one of the agendas that's real big within the black pulpit, or even creeping into black church, is this womanism and these womanist, feminist slash womanist agendas. That stuff is huge. And it's not just coming, and I even made a video about it, that it's not just coming in a way of, oh, allow women to preach. It's more coming in a way of it's a Trojan horse. Yeah, we want women to preach, but then they got all these other agendas that they're trying to put on. They're reclassifying God. They're wanting to assign God a different gender. They're bringing in all these other, well, oh, if women were oppressed, and what are the other groups that were oppressed? And we need to bring those groups in too. And if the Bible was wrong about women, then the Bible is also wrong about people with different sexual preferences, people with different lifestyles. And so the rules and standard of scripture is now erased because the Bible was oppressive to women. And if it's oppressive to women, then now it's been oppressive to all these other people. And we have to liberate the Bible from all this oppression. And even, and I told this about the first conference. When people do little things like regender God, refer to God as Mother God and as a she, and you'll see preachers who you would never thought would be doing that stuff, and they doing it. And I was like, no, that is false. Like God never referred to himself as a mother, and you cannot refer to God. That's blasphemous, as God is she. And they're doing that stuff, and also the babies of that stuff are all these other agendas and other oppressed groups. And then church just becomes just a beacon for civil rights, and now we need to talk about Ukraine and Gaza and the church needs to be on the front line marching. And this is kind of fake civil rights stuff. It's like, listen, man, civil rights was in the 1960s. We're not there. You're not Martin Luther King. Just stop trying to be him. He's gone. He served his generation.
Right.
So yeah,
I think it's
that's the main
interest
agenda.
right. I think it's interesting that you discuss the black pulpit in this context and how you talked about historically, believe it or not, probably since the civil rights operation, and that's what I call it, of the 1960s, that the black community is the probably the only subculture within America that is matriarchal. And
Absolutely.
what we find is that all that matriarchy has not helped us and worked to our advantage. And you would think that all these learned, scholarly men who are standing in these pulpits would know that, recognize that, see that, and would push back against this womanist matriarchal infiltration. But instead of them fighting against it, they lean right into it. I was watching one of your videos and you actually covered a pastor who echoed the sentiment of this female pastor referring, regendering the God of the universe. And he was just like, yeah, I like that. Like some kind of, it was like he was like some kind of puppet. Like there was some strings behind his back. And I was grateful that you called it out. Um, I guess my question to you is, we see this Trojan horse, and like you said, they're bringing in all these other agendas. If you listen to Gina Stewart's sermon, if you can bear to get through it, at the Baptist, the it was during the National Baptist Convention, but it was specifically not the convention. It was like the
The,
leadership board or something. What was it?
yeah, it was. It wasn't. Yeah, it was one of those things.
It was like
Like,
a
yeah,
little sub conference outside of the main big kahuna
right,
conference. But
right.
that entire conference was just full of political, I mean, her entire sermon was full of political propaganda. And then she threw in the sexual perversion of the LGBT movement. If you wasn't listening, you may have missed it. She brought that in, and
Hmm.
it was just a long diatribe of sexism and racism and misogyny, and I was just like, this sermon is trash. And these black
And
men, these men were standing up, I mean, throwing the handkerchief like she was just tearing it, like just pulling the house, bringing the house down. And I was like, are we listening to the same sermon? So what do you believe can be done about this? I mean, because it's not even a silent infiltration.
mhm.
It's very obvious, the way they're doing it. Now, what do you believe can be done about it?
Let me address that Gina Stewart one as well.
Okay.
And I knew we were compromised because everybody who heard that sermon, and even the pastors and preachers on social media, and even the ones that I've been around, they all were saying, "Oh, how great it was! Oh, she preached and Claudia this and Claudia that," and I was just like, "Wait a minute, have any of y'all like?" So
Who's
when I
Claudia?
actually watched, I'm glad you asked. Claudia is someone that Gina Stewart made up, and it's she calls Pilate's wife. I think her name is Claudia. So and so that's who she made the message about. Be like Claudia toward the end of the sermon, who's supposed to be Pilate's wife, who came and told Pilate have nothing to do with this man. So she ended up making it about Claudia,
See, I
and
didn't get
and
that
what I was
far. I had to tune her out. All that hollering and stuff. I can't. My tolerance is
right.
low, and I'm old too. I can't.
But you know what's so funny about this? She try to do everything a man would do, and it's just like, man, like so. But every person and every black preacher, this is another sign of them being compromised. Was all saying how great it was. Oh, she preached. Oh, it was a great day for women, and it's like anybody who even knows what exegesis and expository preaching is know that Gina Stewart was not an expository sermon, and Gina Stewart is not an expositor. And so we were like changing the bar, and kind of like when you put a low level and we kind of hype it up to make it fit. And I'm just like, you guys are compromised, because if a dude would have preached that, it would have been like a C sermon or a C minus sermon. But because it's Gina Stewart and she's a woman and she hooped at the end and threw in a few anti-Trump messages and talked about the civil rights and all that stuff like that, we want to hype it up, because now it's about being an advocate. We all have to virtue signal and pander to women, and it's silly, man. And I was like, anybody who knew what expository preaching was knows that Gina Stewart did not exposit that text. That was all it was about. Shoot, 70% eisegesis the whole time.
You're being
But I
generous.
mean,
It was like 80%. I
uh-huh.
like she didn't when she first started out, you thought that okay, we might actually get some exegetical express, and it went left so fast.
Quickly,
So I mean,
quickly.
within like the first 5 to 7 minutes, she when she started to lay the foundation, and then after that, I was like, here we go, here it come.
She brought in her agenda, but she did it, to her defense, she did it in a clever way. So she didn't just flat out just come out and say, like, I'm marching for in a pride parade. Gina Stewart was sliding stuff in there, and it was like, if you knew what those words meant, when she started sliding that homophobic and heterosexuality, and 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 that's one of the things I wanted to define when I was breaking it down, and heteronormativity. She's saying that, making the idea that black men and black women who are together, that's to say that that's the norm is oppressive,
Right.
especially in the black pulpit. And it's just like, excuse me? If she would have flat out said it, people would have been like, get this woman out of here. But she did it in a very clever way, in a very veiled way. She was good at veiling a lot of her agenda. But to those who know what those words mean and those who kind of initiate it, she might as well have been marching in a whole pride parade and wearing a rainbow during that whole sermon, because that's exactly what she was trying to do.
You're absolutely right. And I think it's so interesting because it bothers me the cowardice of these men, because the way that this always plays out, this never ends well. The same affirmation that these men give these women, they will find themselves in a situation that, like Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem found themselves in, where when it got time to install a new pastor, when that black woman who just assumed that that pulpit was hers, when she didn't get it, what did she do? She
Sued him.
sued the church and then cried sexism. She cried sex. Now, granted, who they put in there, he's just as bad. Like, oh gosh, he's real bad. But they
Oh,
might
I
as
don't
well
know who
just
they
gave
put
her the
in.
pulpit, huh?
They finally put in that new person. Okay, I
Yes.
didn't know who they put in. Oh
Oh
gosh.
gosh, I
Okay.
I I checked his. You talking about social justice warrior James
Oh
Cone
god.
2.0? Yes,
Yeah.
it's the gospel is absent on that website. It just they barely mention Jesus. It is literally a socialist Marxist breeding ground just in the heart of Harlem. I can't even call Abyssinian a church anymore. But this is what happens. They affirm these women who already have hitched their wagon to all the other isms and agendas that come with them. And the next thing you know, these same black men are gonna be whining. She tried to take my church from me. You stupid. We could have told you that if your hand was to the plow like it was supposed to be, right? As opposed to all of this other stuff. We're gonna get to this other stuff and what is driving a lot of these black pulpits to go this way.